Welcome to Brand Builders TV. Deep dive topics, tools and resources brought to you by global thought leaders from within the Brand Builders Club. This show gives you access to the strategies that you can use to move forward with ease and flow in every area of your life and business. In today's show, Philippa is going to take you through part 2 of her 4-part series, From Grief to Gratitude. Today's show dives deeper into how to move up the emotional scale. After identifying the starting point and how you feel about the 4 main areas of your life in part 1, it's time to now start learning some techniques and strategies to move up the emotional scale. The emotion of grief keeps us stuck down at the lower end of the scale. While we can still experience normal feelings of joy and happiness, if we don't learn the strategies to move up from grief and start to transform it, they can remain fleeting moments before being dragged back down again. So enjoy today's show, learn it, model it, and get shit done. Let's go. Hi, and welcome back to Brand Builders TV in this second part of my 4-part series, From Grief to Gratitude. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really glad that you could join me. And if you're on the replay, thank you very much for watching that as well. Now, basically, this is the second part in this 4-part series, as I said, and I'm just going to do a quick recap for anyone who hasn't seen the first part, just to say what we went through in that first part. Now, in the first part of the series, we just had a look at basically the big questions. And the first big question was, what is happiness? The second big question is, what is grief, or what kind of description would you give to grief? And then we went through and we looked at 4 important aspects of life. Those 4 important aspects were relationships, health, livelihood, and finance. And we just had a quick look at where the people who were watching live, where they were on the on a scale of 1 to 10 with those important parts of life. There are other parts of life that we do need to look at when we're talking about emotions and grief and that kind of thing. But those were the 4 that we just looked at in the live video last week. Now, if you haven't watched that, you can always go back and watch it anytime. But this week, we're basically just going to be looking at how to move up the emotional scale. Now, before we actually get into how to do that, I just want to talk to you very quickly about setting intentions. Now, you might be thinking, well, setting intentions is just aiming to do something, aiming to, this week I'm going to complete this. But that's actually quite different. So that's goal setting. Goal setting is, today I'm going to mow the lawn. This week I'm going to get this piece of work done, and I'm going to make sure I win the lottery on Saturday. Those are goals. Intentions are basically, they're more energetic and they're more to do with what you're going to get out of a situation. So before going into any kind of activity, especially when we're talking about emotions and things like moving up the emotional scale, we basically need to set a good intention. So an intention might be, for example, my intention is today to see the good things in everything that I do, or it's my intention today to have really good interactions with everybody that I can, everybody I meet during my day. Or if I'm going to be doing some energy work, my intention is to try and get the best out of this energy work or this situation that I'm going to be doing. So that's the difference between setting intentions and setting goals. Really, the intention is what you want to get out of a situation, more on an emotional level. So what we're talking about this week, and it is entitled, the second part is entitled Moving Up. And moving up basically just means moving up what we call the emotional scale. So if you're watching live, I'm not sure if anyone's live yet, but if you're watching in the replay, give me a little yes in the comments if you've heard of the emotional scale. If you know what that is, just give me a little yes in the comments to let me know whether you've heard of it at all. And we'll basically just have a quick look at it. Now, I have very cleverly managed to print this out backwards because the camera actually turns it around, so it's quite difficult for me to read, but it'll be easy for you to read. And this is just a list of the 22 items that are on the emotional scale. Now, the emotional scale is basically right down at the low levels, so around 21, 22, we've got things like, if you can see that there, we've got things like fear, grief, depression, despair, and powerlessness. Now, these are the really low down, low vibration emotions that we quite often go through in life. Now, unfortunately, that could be to do with if we've gone through some kind of grief and we are feeling those really nasty, horrible emotions of grief, or maybe we are unfortunately suffering from depression, or we're in some kind of situation that we can't get out of, where we're feeling these feelings of despair and really hopelessness, and we're really, really low down on that emotional scale. Now, right at the top of the emotional scale, if you can see that there, that we've got joy, appreciation, empowered, freedom, and love. Love is right up there at the top of the emotional scale. And that's really what we're aiming to go towards in our daily life. Now, for some people, that might be very difficult. It might be a very difficult thing to do, to feel love and to feel appreciation when the situation really is not a very loving or an appreciative situation. And the one thing to note here as well is that it doesn't matter what you do. If you are down here in depression and fear and grief, you can't get right up to the top just like that. It's just not possible. It's not possible to go from that low down feeling emotion up to a high feeling, a very high vibration emotion in a short space of time. Like any kind of journey, it needs footsteps. It needs small steps, starting along the journey and moving yourself up the emotional scale bit by bit. Now, it's important at this point to talk about when we're down in grief and depression and powerlessness. Basically, if you're right down in these emotions, and this is just a little tip that I actually use with my patients, because in my practice, I do get quite a lot of people who are suffering with depression. I do often get people who talk about suicide. It just seems to be something, if you've watched that first video, you'll know that my story is that my father committed suicide 20 years ago, and that was my journey to go from that grief to the gratitude that I feel now. And this little exercise that I use with my patients quite often is that if they are feeling in a particularly depressed state, if they're really not feeling good, basically what I tell them to do is to try and actually get angry about something. Because if you look at the scale here, up at number 17 there, number 17 is anger. And it may seem strange, but when you're moving up the emotional scale, if you're right down in depression, if you can move yourself up to anger, you're going to feel better. It's going to be a slightly higher energy, and it's going to feel better. And I have one patient that actually it works really, really well, that when they go into a state of depression, because they do suffer from depression, it is a terrible illness for people to have to go through. Just by encouraging them to get angry about something, it helps to move them up from that emotional scale right down at the bottom there from depression, and they go up a few levels up to anger, and that anger actually makes them feel better. And feeling angry rather than feeling depressed quite often kicks them in, gets them the motivation to then do the energy work to move even further up the emotional scale. It's that kick that they sometimes need to move up. So let's talk about right up at the top here, joy, appreciation. Oh yeah, hi Fiona. Yes, anger really gets you moving. Absolutely, it really, really does. And I was just saying, it really, really helps with some of my patients who are depressed, that it really sometimes kicks that depression into a higher level so they can come out of it. So right up at the top there, we've got joy, appreciation, freedom, and empowerment. What I'd like to know is, we had a look at happiness last week, but what does freedom and love mean for you? If you could write in the comments, what does love mean for you? Is it a feeling, or is it just something that is it something you can really pinpoint to a specific situation? What's Fiona saying here? There's a loveliness about stomping about. Yes, there is. And I think that's probably a Scorpio trait as well, isn't it, Fiona? We like to be loud and shout about something when we think it needs shouting about. But what would you say is love? How would you describe love? Now, there's a lot of depression is anger turned inwards. Yes, absolutely. Depression is anger turned inwards. We think it's coming in when actually we need to push it out. But what about that emotion of love? Now I'd have to say I'm a real animal lover, and anytime I see an animal I get these really lovely warm feelings of love. What's Fiona saying? Love is a sense of approval and freedom for self. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And I love myself. Isn't that a huge, horrible, arrogant statement? But I have to say that I do. And I absolutely love animals. I look at any kind of animal and I get these really wonderful, warm feelings inside me. I get this real, you know, you can really identify the feeling as a feeling of love. Also, obviously, I have that for my partner and my mum and my family members, a few friends as well, some not so much, some much more than others. But you can really get that feeling of love coming up in certain situations, in certain with certain people, with your pet, or even actually sometimes with a celebrity, something like that. But, you know, it's that really nice, warm, chemical feeling. So what we're looking at this week is how do we move up the emotional scale? Now, I'd really like to know if you would like to share. If you're watching on the replay, please do share in the comments as well. What do you normally do? If you're feeling really kind of down and depressed and you're not feeling too good about a situation, what do you normally do to try and lift your spirits? What do you do to try and make yourself feel a bit better? What's Fiona saying here? Animals are easier to love than people sometimes. That is 100% true, because animals just give you unconditional love, don't they? They just there's no conditions to an animal's love. They just love you because you are who you are. But what do you do if you're feeling down and in the dumps and not feeling very happy about something? What do you do to uplift your spirits, to make yourself feel better? I'd like to know. I know Fiona's watching live, so let's see what Fiona says. What does Fiona do to make herself feel better? Now, what I normally do, and I said this, actually, I did a podcast interview with Sammy Blindell a couple of weeks ago, I think. And one of the things that I love to do, one of my therapies, is when I'm feeling very down and I'm not feeling very good about stuff. I have to say I've never suffered from depression. I'm very grateful for that. Obviously, I've had times where I've felt sad, but I've never felt depression. But when I'm feeling a bit down and things are really frustrating me and I'm feeling a bit meh, I'll go out and I'll dig a hole in the garden, because that is my therapy. That's something that if I'm doing something productive with dirt on my hands and I'm close to nature, that is something that absolutely uplifts my spirits. Now, what's Fiona saying here? I like to put happy clothes on. You're always wearing happy clothes. I always notice that about you, Fiona. And I don't wear anything that doesn't make me feel good. Yes. Yeah, and that's really important for a lot of people, isn't it? That clothing. I know that we have a brand builder, Laura Lauder. She does colours and style and that kind of thing, and you know, she is a real advocate for how wearing the right colours and the right style is really boosts your confidence and boosts your feeling. Oh yeah, that's a really important one. A lot of people, unfortunately, sometimes turn to things like food or even drink or even drugs. I mean, I know I did that in the past. I tried to drink my grief away, and it really didn't help at all. And that's not a way really to move up the emotional scale. So how do we move? Oh, what's Fiona saying here? Digging holes. You want to... That's the homeopath talking. Do I want to bury anyone? I won't be saying that on a live stream. Now, I've actually got I'm going to be very sensitive about this. I've actually got, excuse me, a real life case study about why this emotional work or this energy work is so important. Now, if you watched my stream last week, or my program last week, you'll know that I was asking quite a few tough questions, and there was a little bit at the end where we talked about, you know, that the shock horror statement that you create your own reality. And for some people that can be a little bit of a tricky concept to get their heads around. Now, the person in question actually came onto the stream last week, actually Monday morning. They came and they commented, and they made some fairly nasty comments on the stream, and it turned out that that person was an ex-partner of mine. They won't see this video, and they have been banned from the page because it wasn't very nice what they said. And this person was still feeling the loss of our relationship. And you might, I'm sure nobody saw the comments, I think I got them fairly quickly, but it might have seemed to anyone who didn't know us or him or me that this happened fairly recently. But it didn't. It happened 20 years ago. The relationship ended 20 years ago. And it was really clear that the grief and the loss of this relationship was still making this person very bitter and very angry, and had really decided to attack this TV stream. There's no names and nobody will be able to tell who this person is, so anonymity is guaranteed. But it was a really, really great example of why this energy work is so important. And I have to really say that I have to be very grateful to this person for really showing me, and for showing or giving the live example of how important this work is. Let's see what Fiona says. You need to watch it creating your own reality. Yes, yeah, exactly. It's not the work. This work that to do is actually, it's not something that you can enter into when grief and depression is fresh. So if you're really in a grief state, in an early grief state, you know, saying to someone you create your own reality is really, really not going to help. But just to reply to that, Fiona, this was 20 years later and that person was still not happy with that statement. So it was just such a lovely live example. So what I've actually got for you now is, you know, how to move up this emotional scale. Is I've got a little exercise for you, and this exercise is called "It's Not Your Fault." So basically, last week we had a look at 4 areas of life that people generally tend to struggle with after a while, and it could be related to a trauma in their past. It could be related to a grief that's not been dealt with, or it just could be some that they're not really doing the energy work on a regular basis. And last week we had a look at health, relationships, livelihood, and finance. And we had a look at those 4 areas to see where people were on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest or the best, to have a look at where they were on those, on a scale of 1 to 10 on those 4 areas. And some people came out with a 9 for health, which was really, really great. I think that was Sally who was watching last week. And around the livelihood and finance area, most people said about a 6, which is kind of middle of the road and, you know, fairly low really. And we'd all like a bit more money, I think. But basically, what we're going to do now is, if you watched last week, or if you would like to choose an area of your life that you think needs a little bit of energetic work, just basically to have a look at that situation. So maybe it is a financial situation, maybe it is a really good one that works for most people is relationships. So maybe there's someone who's really annoying you at work, or maybe you're a spouse, a partner, a parent, a brother or a sister. Maybe they're really, really not behaving in a way that you would like them to. Now, really think about that situation and just have a think about whose fault is it about the way that you feel. So maybe you're feeling angry, maybe you're feeling frustrated. Whose fault is it that you feel frustrated? Do you think it's your fault? Because you could have that feeling. If you think it's my fault for not doing the energy work. Do you think it's that other person's fault because they are making you feel those negative emotions? Just have a little think about how that feels and who you blame for the way that you're feeling. Because if there is a kind of negative emotion, there's usually somebody that we think is to blame. Even if it's ourselves, there's usually some kind of reason that we think this is happening to us. So just have a think about that. Now this is basically the exercise. You've got that person that you think is to blame, or maybe you're thinking of yourself if you think yourself is to blame. And the exercise is this. It's just to sit quietly, somewhere where you know you're not going to be disturbed for a couple of minutes. And just to start off by taking some deep breaths. So just to calm the mind. And just to allow the chatter in your mind just to calm. You can close your eyes if you want to, but you don't have to. Just a few more deep breaths until you feel relaxed and sort of comfortable. And then in your mind's eye, so just in your head, I actually want you to think about someone who's a very positive emotion for you. So someone who brings up feelings of love. And that could be a person, that could be even a pet, could be a celebrity, if that brings up those feelings of love inside you. Could be even a material object, if you look at something and it really brings up love inside you. Just really kind of mine those feelings of love just for a second, just so you feel that lovely kind of warm love feeling that comes up. So you've really made your vibration raise with those feelings of love. Just sit with that for a bit, for as long as it feels that you've got that feeling of love as high as you think it can be. And then very quickly, just change in your mind's eye, change to the person that you're blaming. So that could be you could see yourself in your mind's eye, you could see the person that you're blaming in your mind's eye. And with all that love that you've got inside you from the person that you were enjoying looking at, just blast that other person with the love that you've got inside you. So blast that person you blame with those feelings of love. And then with that person in your mind's eye, just say to them, I forgive you. Now that might be very tricky for some people. It's a very tricky thing to have to go through. And the first few times it might feel like you might be feeling a bit of resentment about it. You might not be feeling too positive about it. But I absolutely guarantee if you practice doing that on a regular basis, it might take you maybe 5 goes in one go. It might take you 5 goes every day for a month. But we will start to see these energies shifting. We will start to sort of feel a shift in the energy towards this person. Because we can't really move forward. We can't really move up that emotional scale unless we feel forgiveness for the things that we think that people have made us feel. Because really feelings and energy and emotions come from within us, not from without, but from within. So if you've done that exercise with me, just have a little think about, has that improved your feeling for this person? Let's see what Fiona's saying. Hard to blast with love and forgive in some situations. That's an interesting, when they're not worthy of it. That's interesting, Fiona, because that's the point, isn't it? It's getting over that hump of us saying they're not worthy of our love, and us actually giving them unconditional love anyway, because that's really what's going to take us from the lower down emotions up the emotional scale right up to the top, because it's unconditional love is what can take us forward in life. But you're absolutely right, it is really, really hard. But I am worthy of forgiveness. Yes, absolutely. Everybody is worthy of forgiveness if we're willing to give it. Okay, so with that exercise, you just need to repeat it as many times as is necessary. It could be as I say, it could be very, very, very difficult to do. It is a tough one for some people. I know that I've had a lot of trouble with it. Actually, not so much with my dad. That was actually a fairly easy one, quite strangely. I find it quite easy to forgive him for what he did. But thinking about past relationships, not necessarily the one that I was talking about earlier, but other relationships where things perhaps didn't work out the way that I had envisaged them, that was tougher. That was a tougher one to do. But it really, really does work. If you go through that exercise and you start to feel your emotions, feel your energy shift upwards, up the emotional scale. I'll just hold that up again. I very cleverly printed out backwards so you can see it on camera. And that really does help to move you up. Now, there are lots of other exercises that you can do to move yourself up the emotional scale. And what I've actually got is I've got a free download for you, which has got 2 more exercises in it. And it has an infographic of the emotional scale as well for you to have a look at all the different levels of that. And there is a link to it in the video description for you to download that, so you can have a go at the 3 exercises in there. You can have a look how to do that. It's not your fault exercise as well, just to practice that during the week. And basically that's what I'd like you to do over the next 7 days, if you can, is if you haven't watched that first video, go back and watch that first video and go through the PDF download and just have a go and look at the situations in life where you basically think that you need a little bit of emotional work, and then try to work on those areas and just see how you feel over the course of 7 days. how far up you're able to move on the emotional scale. Now, I just want to skip back a little bit, and I actually forgot to mention, when we were talking about grief, most people have heard about the 5 stages of grief. Now, the first stage of grief is denial. So that's actually, it's not on the emotional scale. That's just, you know, when you get the bad news, you kind of think, no, no, no. And you refuse to basically believe it, because it is quite a difficult thing to kind of comprehend when you're not expecting loss. The next one after that is anger. So, you know, on the emotional scale, anger is at number 17. So this is actually where it gets interesting. So it's there at number 17, which is fairly low down, but not right at the bottom. Now, the third stage of the stages of grief is bargaining. So that's basically where you're in your most vulnerable stage. So if you've lost a relationship, you might be, say, you know, begging and saying, yeah, I'll do this, I'll change this. It's also the stage where you're thinking about the what ifs, and if only I'd done this. And actually, that's something that I really went through right at the beginning of my stages of grief. You know, if only I'd seen the signs, if only I had done something, if only I had said something. That's a really tough one to go through, but it makes no sense whatsoever, because you have no control over anybody else's life or emotions. But it's that third stage of the 5 stages of grief. The fourth stage is actually depression, which is right down at the bottom. So in the stages of grief, or the accepted stages of grief, you're actually moving down the emotional scale, which is, you would expect, is unexpected, because you would expect with grief, as you go over time, you know, everybody says time heals. I actually don't think time heals. I think energy work heals. But when you go through those stages of grief, you would imagine you go up the emotional scale, but the stages of grief actually take you down the emotional scale to depression. And the 5th one is acceptance. Now, I think acceptance is, in my opinion, is not the best word to use for it. I think the best word is resignation, because you just kind of think, there's nothing more I can do. But that doesn't mean you come out of the grief process. That just means you're at a level of, okay, I've accepted where I am now. And this is where actually then you start to do the work. Then you start to do the moving up the emotional scale work, because really you're at the bottom now. You need to move up that scale in order to clear that grief and to really sort of work on that. Because what happens if you don't do the energy work and move up the emotional scale is you are a jilted boyfriend from 20 years ago who pops up on Facebook 20 years later and writes nasty and derogatory comments on your ex-girlfriend's live stream. So it's unfortunate. He needs to do the work, but it is something that really needs doing. So as I said, I've got that PDF download for you. So what I'd really like you to do is to download the PDF download, do the work over the next 7 days if you have the time, and just really come on and let me know how you've got on with that work. If you don't want to share it on the live stream, because it can be very personal, then please do feel free to send me a message. I would be more than happy to hear from you over Facebook. Just send me a Facebook message. And I'd really like to know how you get on. And if you do feel comfortable with doing so, then just pop back on the live stream on this video and just write in the comments how how those exercises felt for you, and how well you got on with them, how well you didn't get on with them. Maybe they were not for you, maybe they didn't do anything for you, maybe they were a little bit too difficult. Please do let me know. And then next week, what we're actually going to be looking at next week is going to be entitled Let It Flow. So when we do the emotional work, when we move up the emotional scale, work's probably not the right word for it, because that has negative connotations, but it is something that we need to put our attention to. And then once we've really kind of got our heads around all the things that we need to do, and to avoiding the triggers that trigger the negative emotions and knowing what to do in those situations, we need to kind of let it flow through our lives, so that when things do come up that really might be a trigger to negative emotions, we can just flow on through those, and then we'll basically stay in the higher levels of the emotional scale. And I'm just going to show this again because I'm pretty pleased with myself. I printed it out backwards. And to learn how to let that flow in our lives. So thank you for watching this. Thank you, Fiona, for watching live, and thank you for anyone else who's watching live. And if you're watching on the replay, thank you as well. And I'm really looking forward to reading your comments. And I'll see you again next week for part 3 of this series. As I said, it's going to be called Let It Flow. So have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you then. Bye.
I hope that you've enjoyed the show today as much as we've enjoyed making it for you. If you've got anything out of this episode, please do tell someone else how they can subscribe to the Brand Builders TV channel at youtube.com/brandbuilderstv. Why not join us at our next Brand Builders Thinkubator, a global mastermind that we run every week to take away the loneliness of being in business on your own. For more information and to book your place, visit light.brandbuilders.club/Thinkubator. That's light.brandbuilders.club/Thinkubator. Until next time, be the ripple that you wish to see in the world, and we'll see you soon.